to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? And I say that part all creepy-like because it makes it sound cool. Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about horror culture and horror subjects, which could involve such sub-subjects as offensive things. We're going to be talking about things that could involve anything from rape, murder, child abuse, suicide. There will be graphic language. So grab all the kids and bring them on in the room and listen to some fucked up nut. No. If that is not your cup of tea, then this is the disclaimer. That's what we're going to be talking about. Otherwise, yeah, bring the kids in the room. It's educational. Right, Steve?
Yep.
Coming up in the future, we're going to be speaking with authors Haley Piper, Max Booth III, and Sarah Langen. And after that, director and producer Eduardo Sanchez. He did this thing called Blair Witch Project. You may have heard of it. I don't know. But today, we have the company of Spider One, frontman for a band you may have heard of called Powerman 5000. Also producer of a couple of films, Death Valley, it's a TV series actually, and I Live Alone. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Spider.
Hey, I didn't get the notice in the intro email about that we're going to be talking about rape, but yeah. Anyway,
it's a disclaimer thing. These things can come up. So if it can happen, we have to talk.
I mean, as it does, generally.
Like, hey, you ever seen that movie, House at the End of the Street or Spit on Your Grave? There's many.
I was going to say there's many, yes.
There are a lot.
There's a few.
Yeah. But hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Our pleasure.
Good to be here.
Before we get into the meat of the interview, anything you want to pitch before we get into it?
Wow, that's usually the end.
What are you currently working on?
We
try to do it at the start and the end because you never know whether or not.
Well, let's see. All right, so working on a brand new Powerman 5000 record.
Awesome.
Halfway through that, so I've been going crazy trying to write songs. Have my first feature film called Allegoria, which I'm sure we'll talk about, coming out in August 2nd, actually. Getting ready to go on tour in July, doing a huge tour with us, Static X, Mudvayne, and Rob Zombie. That's the big summer tour. Just wrapped second feature film called Bury the Bride. We're in the middle of editing that as we speak. And continuing our horror podcast called Bleeders Digest, which is a new original scripted, sound designed, acted scary story horror podcast every week. So
interesting. Wow. I like that title.
Yeah. Other than that, just probably a few other things in there too, but those are the main things going on right now.
As if that's not enough.
Yeah, it's a few things. Yeah, right.
I don't know if Mr. Barton had explained to you the theme of our podcast here, but basically what we do is questions generally falling into three categories: childhood, teenage years, and then adult years. And then we've got some maybe 10 follow-up questions near the end that cover your entire life. But what we're doing is we're basically trying to find out what it is that you personally get out of horror, what you personally enjoy out of horror. And we hope that by talking to as many people as we can, eventually you start seeing some trends and maybe be able to have something to hand off to quote unquote mainstream media after, a bunch of years of doing this to say, horror fans have good reasons for liking the things that they like. And here are those reasons. They're understandable if you just take a couple minutes to talk to them.
Sure. Yeah. So this is your sort of psychoanalyzing me today.
A little bit.
Yes.
Are you
amateur?
I was going to say, are either of you qualified to do
that? That's why I said amateur. So my background, I have had a number of years of counseling, and I'm just shy of 20 years in a 12-step program. I've written a book about the stuff that I've experienced and the things I've learned. Chris has got the horror background. He's a huge horror fan and has a webcomic that he draws as well as his normal horror stuff. Mm-hmm. So between the two of us, we cover both ends of that spectrum.
Nice.
So starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Well, it's funny. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts called Haverhill, Mass, which was about 45 miles north of Boston. Not a heck of a lot to do there. Small factory town. So I think for me, horror and just entertainment in general, television, sort of like a window, TV and movies, music, comics, was a window to what is possibly out there in the rest of the world.
Right.
And, I think I feel very fortunate to have grown up when I did, which is, I was born in the late 60s, so I was very much a 70s, 80s kid. And, looking back, I realized that so much of entertainment that was geared towards kids back then was very monster and music related, which oddly is, a couple of the things that obviously ended up being a part of my life forever. And I think
Right.
back, look, whether it be the old Sid and Marty Krofft shows, Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, HR Puffin stuff. I don't know if anybody remembers this stuff if you're not old.
Oh, yeah. I remember those.
Or the Groovy Ghoulies or Scooby Doo and all this stuff. It was very much a combination of scary stuff and rock music. Clearly, those things were, as a little kid, some of the earliest memories of, as well as I do remember we had a channel, a local TV channel, Channel 56, and they would do a creature double feature on the weekends. Those were some of the, getting to see it. They would always play like Godzilla movies, or I Was a Teenage Werewolf, or whatever, King Kong. And so those movies too were certainly, I would really look forward to every weekend watching whatever old horror movies they would run on Saturday mornings. So those things I think certainly were the very first, earliest things I can remember.
Yeah, it's like a time-honored tradition. Saturday morning cartoons, and then after that, Saturday afternoon local channel horror movies.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting when you think back of how, maybe it's the same now. I guess I don't pay as much attention to, like children's programming, but there definitely seemed to be just a horror frenzy to everything, a bend to all, most stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, like you mentioned, even like Sigmund the Sea Monster and other such shows like that, like they were whimsical in children's shows, but then they had this huge hulking monster as like almost like a mascot.
Yeah, you think of HR Puffin stuff with the witch,
tentacle.
There was the witchy poo and her vulture sidekicks, and it was kind of terrifying when you look back on it.
We've talked to just over 60 people now, and I think you're one of the first people that actually focused on some of those things, like you're saying, HR Puffin stuff and Sid and Marty Krofft specifically. Like I knew of them, but I didn't really watch those specific ones. Scooby Doo, obviously, that one transferred over. You mentioned a bunch of different stuff, Groovy Ghoulies, double features, that kind of stuff. Did you have any particular favorites that you would try to seek out, either every day or every week?
I love those ones. I loved Godzilla movies when I was a kid, and I used to just play Godzilla with my best friend that lived around the corner as early as like kindergarten. I just remember like, you be Godzilla, I'll be the smog monster, and we would just go and like fight it out, and so those were like, this had a huge impact on me. And plus, from as young as I can remember, I also loved to draw. So I was, so I would always try to recreate these characters. I'd have, I still have a lot of my old drawing books from when I was a kid, and it's just filled with monsters and, superheroes. And cause I also got into collecting comic books at a really early age. So all that Marvel stuff in the 70s and 80s had a huge influence on me in creating. And I think for me, what, a lot of people grow up loving stuff or being inspired by stuff. But for me, I think it was more of a launching pad to get so inspired by this stuff that then you felt compelled to create your own stuff, create your own worlds, your own characters, which,
right,
through the years has led to, writing music and producing TV shows and directing movies. And it really does stem from, I can probably count on, on one hand, the biggest influences in my life. And they would be, stuff like Stan Lee, George Lucas, you have these people that through their own creations, and it becomes ingrained in your DNA, and you just have no choice but to then pursue your own path it's not enough to be just a fan. It's almost like it's
Right.
your duty now to try to figure out a way to, for better or worse, contribute to the culture, of
Right.
horror, sci-fi, genre stuff. And that's the stuff that always meant the most to me.
When you mentioned Stanley, were you talking about Kubrick?
Oh, no, I meant Stan Lee but also
Got
Kubrick would be much later, obviously. Kubrick was has become, as far as a filmmaker, my favorite director. And but yes, Stan Lee, meaning Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, all
Got
those
it.
guys from
Yep. Cool.
I mean, I like to think I would be on a first name basis with Kubrick.
Yes. Yeah, when you brought up the comics, I didn't know if you were going to go for like Marvel DC or like eerie, creepy Vampirella, but then I thought to myself, well, that might be a little, how can I say this? I don't know how many kids would have been getting their hands on eerie and creepy. You know what I mean?
They were around that. We definitely had those around the house too, as well as magazines like Fangoria and Starlog, and it's really a magical time where content was scarce. So those things, I think, meant more to you as a kid. I think of the same thing with music, where you buy an album of your favorite band, and really that's all you had, unless you were fortunate enough to go see them in concert once a year or once every couple of years. You'd have this one photograph on the back of an album, and you would just become absorbed with looking at Kiss Alive 2 and just wondering from what universe these guys were from. And I think the same was true with movies. And it wasn't like now, obviously, where you can Google any movie and pull up 1,000 images, and you can watch that movie every day if you want at home.
Yeah, your source for the information was that Fangoria magazine or whatever tangible piece of literature you found for it.
So you would hang on to them, you would collect them, and you would value them and put them in bags, and and go back and look at them over and over, because you didn't have unlimited access to everything. And I think there's something that that it's music and film, and there's a certain devaluation that's, I think, happened over the years, unfortunately, because of everything is so accessible.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize just how much the internet killed, or why the internet killed, for example, the comic back issue market. When I was in my early 20s, I worked for one of the largest comic book stores in the world, Passaic Comics, which, if you remember the comics from the 70s, you remember the middle 2 pages that were yellow that listed all the for sale comics? That was Passaic Bookstore.
Oh, gotcha.
And what happened with the internet, especially eBay, is, previous to the internet, the way it worked was you could only get your comics mainly from your local comic book store or the conventions that might come around once or twice a year. And so there was this perceived scarcity, which is what you were just talking about. But like when I worked at Passaic Bookstore, they had a warehouse. I kid you not. They had long boxes stood up endwise, and you'd have one box that was nothing but X-Men 10 through 20.
Jesus.
And then another box that was X-Men 20 through 30. And they had 40 of each in the back. It was surprising how much they had. And then, like we say, when the internet came, then particularly like eBay allowed other sellers to then sell to each other, which completely killed that scarcity. But it also ties in with what you're talking about with the music too. Same thing, pictures everywhere and all kinds of memorabilia. It's really interesting how that democratization of information has changed a lot of different things that you wouldn't have thought that it would have changed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you would have to get very creative about consuming what you love.
Yeah,
I've told this story before, but I remember very clearly, because Jaws was one of my still is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I would sit with a cassette recorder and just record the audio of Jaws, so I could listen to it on when the movie wasn't on. I would just listen to the audio, and there was probably a point at when I was 10 or something, I probably had the movie memorized. You know what I mean? But yeah, so you would do things like that, and I'm sure there are other people out there that have did similar things. I mean, and that was when when you do stuff like that at an early age, you're clearly setting yourself up for a lifetime of obsession with this kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So did you have anybody in your immediate friends or family circle who was also a big fan of horror?
Well, yeah, I mean, my older brother, Rob.
Oh yeah, that guy.
That guy.
Very,
You know, it's funny.
Sorry way to bring that up, but I mean, yeah, clearly, like that is a, you know, because we, you know, we're only 2 years apart in age, so we really grew up discovering and loving the same things at the same time. But yeah, so he clearly was, you know, to even a higher degree of, you know, obsession than I was, because I was, you know, at a certain age, I think more interested in going out and getting in trouble and causing spray painting the school and stuff like that.
As you do.
He remained vigilant in his staying in his room and reading Fangoria. Yeah, but we both, you know, have a lot of the same loves and interests, and you know, that goes without saying, I suppose.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I intentionally try to do as little research on our guests as possible because I want to have, you know, a clean slate when it comes to interaction, and whatever you say triggers whatever it does in me. But when Steve asked us about interviewing you, I wondered to myself if you were the original vocalist for Powerman 5000. And so I decided to look that up, and obviously then realized that that's mainly your gig. You know, that's your thing, and everybody else is the ones who have changed. But while I was scanning the page, I happened to see about, you know, your brother, and I thought, shit. Like, because I didn't want to, you know, I want this to be about you. And then I was like, fuck, how do I, you know, separate that? And then I kind of put that to the side for a bit. And then a day or two later realized, shit, we're going to ask him about, you know, people in his family anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say,
so
that was not a manufactured leading question. We ask everybody that. Like, did you have like-minded friends or family when you were younger? Or it's going to come up in the teenage years too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I mean, and beyond Rob, I mean, I think there was certainly in the 80s when, you know, high school years, you know, in the VHS video rental culture, you know, it was just get on your bike with your friends, drive to the local video store and head straight to the horror sci-fi section, you know, and that's all we cared about, like, with, you know, because it was like you felt like you were getting something you shouldn't be watching, you know, so you would always just go and look for, you wouldn't even know what these movies were. You've never, you know, and you just look for the most disgusting cover art, and
it's got the cool cover art, exactly.
Yeah, and everyone, like, you know, going over your friend's house and the basement and put it in, you know, you just always felt like you were, doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, and but it was
sometimes
great.
You get a fun surprise, like, hey, this cover has a robot metal claws and a bag full of body parts. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, of course. And they usually were. It didn't. I don't even think we cared about quality. It was just like everything was awesome. Like, I don't remember that. You know, it's funny. That's just sparks the thought. And you know, as we sort of compare and contrast now with then, that's another thing I think about. Like, how now everybody is so fucking critical of everything. And I think back to those. Yeah, like, I loved everything. Like, I just thought everything was great. Like, I was not. And you know, maybe that's just an age thing when you're a kid. But I never really, like, there were things I liked better than other things. Like, I knew Star Wars was better than Battlestar Galactica, but
I wonder if that ties in with what we were saying about no longer having scarcity, because now that you have so much to pick from, you've got to say, okay, well, what am I going to filter out?
True.
Yeah. And also the idea that, like, no one wants to watch 5 minutes of something. If you don't like it, you can turn it off and go to the next thing. But you know, if you went to the video store,
that's true. Back then, you didn't have a choice.
Yeah, you put in the effort to, like I said, get on your bike, ride to the store, get it, come home. You know, you were going to watch that. You're going to watch it from beginning to end.
Whether you liked it or not.
Yeah, because that was it. And generally, I think that made you like it more because there was an effort and investment you made.
And maybe you put it back on again a couple days later before you have to return it because you're bored and you got nothing else to do. So you put it on, watch it a second time, and now you're picking up things that you didn't see the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you have anybody in your family, maybe of the generation above yours, parents, uncles, aunts, who were fans of horror, or was it just your friends group, like your age?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, my family, my parents and extended family, no one me and Rob were kind of a weird anomaly in that world. Like there was no, because most people I know as adults now, whether they're musicians or artists, or they generally go like, "Oh, my dad played piano, and there was always music around the house," and yeah, we didn't have any of that. Like my parents were very like, my dad just worked in a factory, and my mom, for most of her, until we were older, stayed at home, and there wasn't any, honestly, any art or music around the house. We just, and I think that's maybe why we became so obsessive about it, was because once we discovered it on our own, it was just like we couldn't get enough of it.
Right.
But I do give my parents credit for never really censoring us from anything.
Mhm.
But we would watch anything and everything, probably like wildly inappropriate stuff at a very young age. And either they just didn't know or they didn't care or whatever, but I'm very thankful for that, because I got to, I would be watching Clockwork Orange at 10 years old, you know what I mean? And just,
Ooh.
and for whatever reason, it just clicked and I got it and it made sense to me. And so I think that was just just the unlimited access was the gateway to everything else.
So one of the things that has come up in other interviews is that for a lot of guests, not all of them, but some of them, there's often a dividing line where prior to the line they were scared by horror, and then at some point something happened, and then after that they started to enjoy horror. Other guests, it was enjoyment from the get-go. You haven't really touched on any actual, seeming to be afraid of any of the stuff that we've talked about so far. So were you enjoying it from the get-go, or was there a dividing line where before that you were like, no, this actually scared me?
I only have one memory of being terrified by something, and it wasn't even watching the movie. So again, back to, my age, is it puts me in a time where I was old enough to remember when The Exorcist came out in the theater for the first time. And so when that came out, there was so much talk about what it was doing to people, and people were having nervous breakdowns. And I remember a friend of mine, his mom went to see it in the theater and apparently just lost her mind, like completely broke down. And so now I've got this movie that is just, there's, you're 10 years old or however old I was.
Right.
Just like, this is what is this thing, And I remember at the time, like there would be TV commercials for the film, radio ads, and I was too scared to even listen to the radio ad. And I have a distinct memory of being a little kid, sunny day, summer day in the driveway playing basketball, with listening to the radio, and a radio ad comes on for The Exorcist, and I just haul ass and run in the house and like hide.
Nope. Big old can of nope.
And so it just became this thing. So it took me a while. I honestly don't remember the first time I saw it. And since I've seen it, 10 times, but it really affected me. And that was more just the
hype.
The hype. Yeah. So that was the only time I think I was ever afraid to watch something.
Also, being that your friend's mom was terrified by it, sounds like that kind of brings it home. Someone who has been affected by this,
right?
Yeah, and it takes on this other, this otherworldly quality. Where what if it does that to me, and what if I, or I watch it and become possessed by the devil? You start. I think that's what people were actually afraid of,
right?
Yeah, that too, because it was like it wasn't werewolves or aliens; it was satanic possession, which kind of is a real thing in some people's faith.
Yeah, and another movie that I was talking about this with somebody the other night about. There really hasn't been a horror movie, and I guess I consider this a horror movie, that has affected the fear of culture more than Jaws, because I don't think that any of us go in the water without hearing that music or thinking about the potential of a shark. You know what I mean? And I think that one, even though I wasn't like, I saw that movie as well when it came out in the theater, and it scared the shit out of me. But it was the lingering after effect that 40 years later, you were still like, man, when you go in the ocean, you're just like, I don't know, that memory, it's pretty remarkable that, and again, sort of your point to possession, it's a real thing, it's a shark. It exists. It is a real monster that exists in this world. And so I think that's probably why that has and still has such an effect on the culture.
Yeah. Slight change of gears. Did you participate in Halloween as a kid?
Oh yeah. Huge Halloween. Yeah. Every year was a big deal. Yeah. Halloween was get the shitty store-bought costumes until we got a little older. Then we would make our own. We would always do these weird hybrid costumes. Like, well, I'm going to be, I have photos of like Halloween costumes I made as a kid. And they were like Peter Criss's makeup from Kiss, but he's holding a sword and, but it is dressed in a ninja suit. It was just like, sort of like get all the cool things at once and put them together, But
did you have a favorite?
I mean, that was I'm trying to think back to, that was a good costume. I think like doing the Kiss makeup was always a big deal. Like, who are you going to be that year? Were you going to be Gene Simmons? Were you going to be Peter Criss? Ace Frehley's makeup was always a little too complicated, so getting silver makeup was not easy. But yeah, that stuff was always cool. I mean, Halloween was great. We always decorate. We turned like the backyard into a graveyard. I remember me and Rob early on. We would create in our basement like a haunted maze, sort of like a
super. See, this is exactly why I'm jealous of people who live in states with basements.
Yeah, right. Homegrown like Halloween horror nights, and we would charge like the local kids like 5 cents to come through. And, you'd sit in the back of a wagon, and one of us would pull you through as the other one jumped out and scared you. So we would. I remember doing that. We would build these. I'm sure they were just terrible, but that was pretty cool.
How about a least favorite costume?
I mean, I think anything store bought. Those ones that were like the plastic sack, basically.
The Van Cooper costumes. Those have come up in a few podcasts now.
Yeah, the plastic mask that the elastic band would always break in 5 minutes after putting it on, and yeah, those were terrible.
You mentioned the Kiss makeup. Did you enjoy the process of getting dressed up, or was it just because you were a fan of Kiss, or were you enjoying the process of doing the makeup stuff?
Yeah, I think I think it was both. I mean, obviously, I was a big fan of the band as a kid, but I think that was another thing that was really intriguing. Was because at this time, going back to horror in particular, Fangoria, and they would really focus on effects and gore and effects artists, and it was you started to get to know like, Tom Savini, I know that name, or these guys would start to become just as sort of famous as the actors in the movies, and you would, and I think that was of interest to me, and I know Rob too, like just to try to build stuff or to make recreate a makeup thing. I remember one year Rob built a Darth Vader helmet out of like milk cartons, and like things like that, so just
whatever works.
And again, it was like back to this idea that like you couldn't just go to Target and buy a Darth Vader helmet. They didn't exist. You had to be creative and figure out ways to make this stuff, and so you could have more of it in your life. It wasn't enough to just see the movie. You had to sort of live and breathe it as much as you could.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Did you have any reoccurring dreams when you were a kid?
I don't know. Not that I remember.
Okay.
I think so.
Was there ever a time when you're actually terrified of something in real life as a kid?
It's funny. I don't ever, as a kid or an adult, ever really having any memories of a lot of fear. Even into like adulthood, something you wouldn't necessarily be afraid of, but even being like anxious or nervous about stuff like performing, being in a band. I know so many people that have been in bands for 20 years and they still get incredibly nervous before every show. For whatever reason, I don't ever get nervous or scared or wouldn't, even if it's a new situation, I don't know why that is. I feel like I'm more comfortable doing that than I would be more comfortable getting on stage in front of 100,000 people at a festival in Europe than going to a dinner party. I think like that makes me more comfortable than just like. So yeah, like I don't, even as a kid, I don't remember being terribly fearful of much. I mean, I'm sure there were times I was, but I mean, I'm thankful for that. I feel like I've had plenty of self-doubt, which is, I think, comes from growing up in New England, where there tends to be sort of a very self-deprecating, like I don't know how to describe this, sort of like the good stuff's for other people, not us losers here and in Massachusetts. And so I feel like I had to get over that more than anything. Just and that's why I feel like in a lot of things I've done, even though I feel like I've accomplished a lot of pretty cool things in my life, I feel like I've always been a bit of a late bloomer, because I think it's taken me a while to like, oh yeah, I could do that too. Like that's not just for the magical people in California or you know what I mean? Like, so,
can't relate.
So, I don't know if that's
it's not that you're afraid of it. You just don't think that it's a thing.
Yeah. I think it just seemed like that's for other people. Like that's because I feel like that's what I was always sort of not even indirectly taught as a kid, was just like, oh, that stuff's for other people, and we're here. And it just took a while to figure out, like, no, like that's not how it works. You just get off your ass and work really hard and believe in yourself and do this, take the steps you need to take to accomplish a goal,
Yeah, I remember when we interviewed, it was Kareem Hussein, who was, I think, director of photography on some Cronenberg films or maybe it was the younger Cronenberg. I don't know if he worked with the older one, but anyway, he talked about wanting to be a cinematographer from basically a very early age. And I asked him, I was like, how did you even think of that as a concept? Like, because I knew that, like, at that age, I wouldn't have even realized that was a possibility of like that. I wouldn't know that was a career. And in his case, somebody had bought him a book that was like a making of a horror movie. And so he had that introduction. But like you're kind of talking about here, it's like when you don't even know that it's a possibility, like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. I mean, when I think back to music in particular, I think that I feel very fortunate in my early teenage years to discover punk rock, because that was one of those things that anyone who fell in love with punk rock, it did the same thing to everyone, which was it stripped the mystery and magicalness away from music, and it made you say, like, anybody can do this, like anybody can get up on stage, and you don't have to be have a beautiful singing voice, you don't have to be the most proficient guitar player in the world, put two chords together and have something to say, and that's that's
and maybe not even two.
Yeah, or not, but that changed everything for me, because I always loved music as a kid, but it just, again, it seemed like one of those things that was for special people. That was, you'd listen to I don't know, Elton John, and you'd be like, well, I can't do that. Like that's like a magical thing that he can do, play piano and sing like that. But then you find the Ramones or the Sex Pistols or the Dead Kennedys or Black Flag, and you're like, wait.
Yeah, you're like, but I could do that.
You're like, that seems a little bit more achievable, and it's fucking cool, And so it's like that was, and I think that that the punk rock, the DIY punk rock aesthetic that just became the most important driving force in my life has then translated to everything I do.
How old were you when you discovered that?
I mean, I was probably 13 or 14, right at the beginning of probably freshman year in high school, starting to find these bands and going to see these bands play at all ages shows in Boston. I would take the train in on Sundays, and I would just, my mind was blown that this entire culture existed, and all these bands were like doing it themselves. They're making their own records, handing them out in the parking lot. And then there was the fanzine culture. There are people making their own magazines, just Xeroxing them. And it just, that to me was the biggest lesson in life. And I don't think if I hadn't fallen in love with that music and that scene, I don't think I would have accomplished anything in life, because it was the only thing that taught me that you can do whatever you want. You don't need permission to start a band. You don't need permission to make a record. You don't need permission to make a movie. You just need to do it. Get off your ass. Stop making excuses. Stop coming up with the 50 reasons why you can't, and just figure it out.
Right.
And it all comes from finding punk rock.
This kind of ties in with moving into the teenage years, which we're about ready to do anyhow. What it's making me wonder is, in the past, some of the people that we've interviewed, some people, horror has been with them through their entire life. Some people, through their teenage years, they kind of divert into other things, particularly music, and then come back to horror maybe in their college years or adult years. Was horror always in your life through the teenage years, or did you divert and then come back to it?
I mean, yeah, everything remained, but I think that you do go through phases where things are more important at a certain point in your life. I mean, comic books, for instance, were very important to me at a very young age. But then as I kind of grew out of it, always had a love for it in the art, particularly the art. And, even when I didn't actively collect comic books, if I saw a comic shop, I'd always go in just to look around. And the same thing with horror, it was always there, but it might take a particular movie to come out to like reignite my enthusiasm. And also the culture of the movies changed too. So like, like for me, not to jump ahead, but like the 90s when it sort of when horror became sort of this, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, kind of CW almost feeling. Like it didn't interest me as much. But then fast forward, horror culture changed, and then more recently, people, I guess I call it elevated or art horror, things like Hereditary, and started to like, whoa, like this feels more in line where my head's at now. So going back to younger years and teenage years, I think with the explosion of Star Wars and Alien and all these, science fiction for a while, that really took the front seat. You know what I mean? Because that became such a huge thing in TV and movies. So yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it was always there. Just, certain waves of things would sort of take precedent over other things.
You did mention that, with the comics and the horror, you kind of were saying you diverted it from a little bit, but there were certain things that kind of caught itself up above your radar and that you did then pick up on it. What were some of those things?
So music became, so after high school, I graduated high school, I went to art school for literally 3 months. I got accepted to the Museum of Fine Arts and the School of Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which was
nice,
pretty prestigious school.
Yeah.
And then I got there and I was like, man, again, I started to fall, this is when art was sort of at the forefront for me. But then I fell into the culture of music and going to see shows and bands playing. And I really wanted to make music, I was like, so I dropped out of school and then started to focus on music and then, did that. But then through that, you would create artwork for your band. And so art comes back because you're drawing all these cool flyers and, but then, certainly, like say, I remember in the early 90s, like comic book culture kind of came back into my world because of certain artists like Todd McFarlane, and then it created Image Comics and these, so suddenly this whole new vibe of over the top, like ultra violent comics. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So then, you find the love of that again and so on and so forth. So, I think sometimes the aesthetic of things would change and then grab your attention again. Whereas maybe it didn't, the stuff that you were into when you were 10 didn't translate to, when you're 19,
Right. Going back to the teenage years for a minute, just to round out some of the questions there. So did you continue participating in Halloween as a teen?
I'm sure I did. I don't have a ton of memories of that, but if you're in high school or just out of high school, I mean, you're sort of on your own now, right? So I moved out of my parents' house when I was 17, I think. So I think your experience of Halloween has moved from trick or treating to
more partying,
debauchery,
the fun stuff.
Yeah. So I think it always was there, but the approach was certainly changed. But then, you go fast forward to adulthood and you start going to these haunts and Halloween horror nights, and especially living in LA, it's like Halloween is probably the biggest I feel like Halloween's bigger than Christmas in LA. There's like Not Scary Farm and Halloween Horror Nights and Universal and Warner Brothers Backlot, and it's crazy. Like it's awesome. It's so fun.
There's a lot of stuff there. Yeah,
It sounds awesome.
So you mentioned not really being afraid of anything through your whole life. So I'll also mark that off for teens. No reoccurring dreams in your teens?
Not that I can remember. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't remember any of my dreams.
Not every question lands.
Yeah. Yeah, I should have said that earlier. Not every question's going to land. We just ask because you never know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So no horror media that really jumped out to you in your teens. I mean, you mentioned Aliens. That kind of fits in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that became, that had a huge impact on me. And that was, what year did Alien come out? 80?
79, I think.
79. So I was still pretty much a little kid. It's so crazy when I think back to these and I do the math. I'm like, really? I went to see Alien when I was like that young? It's like this stuff.
Yeah, explains
parents
so much.
thinking, like, But yeah, I think that, I think what, then, when you talk about getting a little bit older and you start getting those, late teen, early 20s, what's your priority? It's freedom. It's like being, so you're, whereas media was your only window to the world, for me anyway, TV, movies, music was my escape. Now suddenly I actually can escape, right? I'm on my own and like I have freedom now, and I'm,
Right.
you're sort of focusing more on that stuff. For me anyway, just being like active in life, getting out in the world, and like I said, going to concerts and parties and meeting. That's the time, and you live in a house with like 7 people, and just the insanity that would ensue, and the amount of people that have kind of come and gone in those years is sort of remarkable, when I think back on it.
Actually, that's a good question I hadn't asked. So in your teenage years, did you have anybody else who was starting to also be a fan of horror other than you and your brother? Did you run into anybody else that you had common ground with?
I mean, always. Yeah. I mean, I had friends in high school that were too. I had one of the only people I still stay in touch with from high school. He always was very interested, and he wanted to be an effects artist, and he would, try to sculpt. He would, always get clay. We'd steal clay from the art department in high school, and he would sculpt these like gory, faces, and then moving on to art school and stuff. I think that generally, when I went to art school, it was sort of my first exposure to, which I think goes hand in hand with horror, which is sort of like the goth culture, like these goth girls with their faces pale white and black lipstick and dyed black hair, and they'd listen to The Cure and Bauhaus.
That's how it always starts. The big titty goth chicks, they just.
So that was a whole new thing to me, because that was separate from the hardcore punk rock culture, which was more like shaved heads and combat boots, and suddenly and I moved to Boston, I was sort of coming into this whole other culture of Rocky Horror Picture Show and this, but much more in the goth side, which opened up a whole new world to me.
Actually, that was another question I wanted to ask too, that you started to touch on. If you moved more into music in your teens, I was wondering, so then like what were some of the bands that were influential to you? Like what other media were you consuming?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, I got heavily into, I guess I moved to Boston, and I got heavily into sort of like the local music scene, which was really cool. Like there were bands like SSD Control and the Proletariat, and they just seemed very like they were on a mission. It was a whole straight edge movement where you didn't drink or do drugs, and it was also a hyper violent environment too, which was interesting. Which I guess there's a sort of a thin line connected there to horror, that you saw a lot of bad shit go down. You saw a lot of fights, a lot of this was when mosh pits only existed for a select few bands. It wasn't like now where you go see Pearl Jam and there's like 60-year-olds trying to start a mosh pit. It's like, this was back in the day when it was like you only went in the mosh pit if you were, prepared to have your nose broken. And very interesting, violent culture that, I never really put the attachment that it is similar to a horror aesthetic. And of course, there were bands like.
Did you find yourself? Sorry, I was going to ask. Did you find yourself attracted to the hyperviolence?
Yeah, I think I did. I think I really liked the. I mean, not that I wasn't a violent person, but I liked the aggression of it. And and when you're a 15, 16-year-old boy, like that's what it feels like in your head. You know what I mean?
Energy.
Yeah, it's like I have a great affection for a lot of those bands now, but like it's not something that really makes sense for me to like throw on in the background at home. but back then, that was the soundtrack of your brain. It was going a million miles an hour. It was incredibly loud and angry, and it just felt, a lot of people make a connection to horror and heavy metal. I was less of a metalhead, more of a punk rock kid, but I see the connection. I see the connection to punk rock too. Is that it is a very you feel like you're part of, which is I think a lot of people feel like with horror, is you feel like you're part of a very taboo club, right? And it feels it's just, even though most people that are fans of this stuff are completely well-adjusted, like reasonable people, but it's an interesting feeling to be attracted to stuff that is essentially really ugly and awful and in real life, which would more than likely sicken you to death. But when it's presented in a fantastical way, it's just really
Neat.
fun, And I think the music was,
it's more alluring.
The punk rock thing was the same way. It was, most of these angry, pissed off, want to tear down society kids were probably, 98 pounds soaking wet. They probably couldn't accomplish anything, but there was just something very powerful about feeling like you were part of that world,
Yeah. Adulthood. You mentioned Hereditary, elevated horror. What else jumps out at you as being really impactful in your adult years?
It's funny. I've recently signed up for that Letterboxd app because people always ask me, "What are you watching?" And I'm like, I don't know. I know I just watched 30 movies this month, but I can't remember any of them. But I think that I still go back to my favorites. I still go. The Shining is always never lost an ounce of impact. Since I saw it as a kid and if I watched it today, there's always films I'm seeing that have impact. Like anybody, I still love a fun, ridiculous slasher movie. You know what I mean? But I do tend to lean towards stuff that maybe feels a little bit more adult. I don't know. Is that a bad word? I don't know. But
no.
Some of the movies, the Lodge,
more rated R.
Yeah, like have you seen The Lodge? That was really good with
yeah, that was a good one.
Riley
I love the end. Like no, there's no happy ending. You're fucked.
Those kind of I just like that. I like that quiet. Because anybody can manipulate an audience with a loud jump scare or hyper gross. Like we watched the other night. We watched The Sadness, which was a incredibly gory zombie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I finally just got around to watching that myself recently too, and that's they push some envelopes.
It's insane, like insanity, right? Like, which I love and appreciate, but I do like an uncomfortable tone, like that to me. As a kid, I used to watch Night Gallery, which was the sort of lesser known Rod Serling show.
Yeah, that was the one that was similar to Twilight Zone, and he would just walk past paintings, and each one had a story.
Yeah, so it was sort of like the horror version. If Twilight Zone is sci-fi, then Night Gallery is horror. And they weren't particularly like exciting stories or gory stories, but there was something, especially when you're a kid watching it, something undeniably like adult feeling about them, which is hard. I don't know if that makes any sense. So that in itself made it feel uneasy, to me as a kid. And so there is something about adults being in trouble that I think is scarier because inevitably those are the people that are supposed to be in charge and protect. And I think that's what made The Exorcist so terrifying, was even though the person being possessed was a young child, all these seemingly very capable adults were helpless, and I think there's something about that that's really scary. So I think, I know I'm rambling, but For me, it's about a tone and
Mhm.
making you feel uneasy in the moment. And I think that's ultimately the scariest approach, that you can take.
Not so much the jump scare or the terror, just the like you said, the discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, because I think the other stuff is effective, but it's also easier to accomplish. You know what I mean? It's easy if you're making a film and you have a very quiet moment, and it's great and it's fun to do because I do it in the new movie we just made, but a very quiet moment where a very long dark hallway, and it's coming, the end of the
Yeah, how's it
hallway,
going?
something's going to be there, but you don't know exactly when. And when the sound design is done correctly and it's loud enough, man, it's going to scare you. I mean,
Mm.
but you can't have a whole movie like that. I think you need to pick your moment.
True. Yeah. Otherwise, you fatigue the audience, sort of. No, I like actually where that was going. You kind of were saying you were going off on a tangent, but I think that actually might be going in an interesting direction. So you're talking about tone, adults being helpless, and that being more scary to you. I mean, the logical follow up question to that would be why, but I think it's kind of almost
Self-explanatory.
obvious. Yeah, that
Yeah, as opposed to when you think about 80s slasher movies, Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, where it's the trend was generally dumb teenagers, right? But your expectation
right,
with dumb teenagers is like, of course they're gonna die. They're dumb
right,
teenagers. Like
Yeah,
right.
they don't have
they're
the
having sex in the
capability.
woods. They're gonna die.
Yeah, so you've eliminated a certain level of fear because so now it just becomes about the gross out moment or the jump scare but when you do put people in people that, like I said, are seem very capable in life and should be able to and just can't. I think there's something really powerful about that. Alien was like that when I loved Alien in the sense that where the crew of the ship, it was such a unique casting, and these people that seem, I mean, they seemed like,
Professionals and like they knew what they were doing.
but they seemed like, well, they should be able to handle this situation, and then clearly they couldn't.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think there's something, in Hereditary, which we brought up, is a great example of that, where it's just, and it also examines, just the frailty of family and like just how complicated those relationships can be, where the horror of humanity sometimes is almost as scary as the fantastical stuff. Just the
Yeah,
life itself can just be the scariest element of anything else you can dream up.
Absolutely.
yeah. I was gonna connect this to Hereditary, but also The Shining. It's also same situation with The Shining. Adults other than Danny. I mean, all the characters in that movie are adults, and there's also a helplessness compared to obviously what's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on in that movie, but it's all a lot of helplessness.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. And I think that those two movies share a lot of similarities and maybe not obvious ones, but yeah, I think that being one is the family aspect of it, not knowing what the past, how much the past has to do with the scenario they're in right now. The Shining is a big part of that story. Is just a very small moment, but when she explains how he accidentally broke Danny's arm, like that one moment, realizing that
Mhm.
whether that was completely by accident or you see like what he was capable of, and now what where they're at right now with whatever
Yeah.
supernatural stuff is starting to affect their family. But yeah, the family dynamic is such a great and kind of untapped horror scenario.
Yeah, there's a lot of family horror and like Texas Chainsaw style. Like they all get along with each other for the most part, and they inflict harm among others. But yeah, not a lot of dysfunctional family horror like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. A recent guest of ours, they were talking about how they had a little bit of a dysfunctional family, but they would watch horror and they would all laugh at it. And I had commented during that call that it almost sounded like, because one of the wrap up questions that we'll ask towards the end is why horror compared to other genres? Aren't there other genres where you can find some of the similar things that you're finding interesting in horror? And we kind of touched on the fact that for some of these other genres, it may have actually been a little too on the nose for their dysfunctional family to go, okay, that's actually making me uncomfortable, but with the horror, I can at least laugh at it.
Yeah, it could be like, well, hey, we have problems as a family, but at least we're not being chased by a maniac wielding a knife, you know?
Exactly.
Right. And so where you're saying that's an untapped thing in the horror genre, I'm wondering if there's a reason for that. Like that might be a little too, yeah.
Well, it's not unlike, I know a lot of musicians that refuse to watch Spinal Tap because it's just too
yeah.
It's like, it's not funny because this is exactly what happens to me every day, you know?
Yes.
But, what was I going to say? I had thought, but it's gone now. But anyway, yeah, totally agree with you. Oh, I know what it was going to be. When you say why horror, and it made me think of something that, for whatever reason, you're attracted to the genre. But I do think that there is something, a bonus that you get with it, and that is the sense of community that is around the genre, which is the same with punk rock or heavy metal or there's certain where that when you watch a great horror movie, you know you're going to go online and people are going to be talking about it, debating about it. You can go to a horror convention and hang out with people that are like just as obsessed with things as you, and I think that it adds to the experience. So you're not some forms of entertainment. It's sort of like, I suppose there's probably weird communities of people obsessed with like game shows or something. I don't know, but it probably not, So like when you watch a game show, you're kind of like, well, yeah, I watched that, and you're kind of in a vacuum. But with horror or sci-fi or comic books or punk rock, heavy metal, you really are, you never really feel like you're experiencing these things alone, because there's millions of people that are obsessed with it too. I think that adds to the fundamental attraction.
Yeah, it's almost tribal in a sense.
Which is why it's fun to make those movies, because you have a place, you
participating in the community.
Yeah, and that there's a world for you that is sort of waiting, not waiting necessarily for my movie, but waiting for a movie, waiting for the next cool movie, waiting for the next TV show. And I think that's exciting. Whereas if I decided to write and direct a crime drama, I don't think I would have that feeling of excitement or anticipation, because I don't know who's waiting for the next crime drama.
Yeah, they don't exactly have crime drama conventions.
Yeah, I'm clear that there are fans of those kind of movies, but it's a different thing. It's a different level of energy that exists with genre stuff, with horror and sci-fi.
Right. Let's see. So you mentioned Halloween as an adult, Halloween Horror Night, Knott's Farm. Do you dress up as an adult, or do you participate in Halloween in other ways?
I have dressed up as an adult. I haven't lately, but I have, which is kind of fun to stay home and just let trick-or-treaters come to the house, but have a really terrifying costume just to watch the apprehension of the kids, like not wanting to come to the door. But it's crazy because now as an adult, obviously I'm still heavily involved in the scene and everything, but I have 3 kids, but I have a daughter who's 2.5 who is obsessed with Jason and Freddy and Ghostface. And it's not because we pushed it on her. She just started to see it around, and she started, so she is just fanatical about it, which is kind of hilarious. So it's kind of gotten me to go back and revisit some older movies that I haven't watched in a long time. And she's asked for her 3rd birthday, is asking for Freddie and Jason birthday party. I don't know how the other kids are going to deal with that, but we'll see.
Favorite costume as an adult?
I would do sort of like a classic, because I could do it myself, like a George Romero zombie, like guy in a suit with just zombie makeup and blood dripping out of my face, and go get some like great like rotted teeth, just look horrifying,
Easy, practical.
Yeah.
All right. So no recurring dreams as an adult, I assume.
Well, I've had one recently, but that was not reoccurring over a long period of time. But so we wrapped our second film, Bury the Bride, and this will be for a future podcast. But you've heard stories of like the making of Apocalypse Now and Jaws and like these insane, like this was one of those. Like it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. with our schedule and the things we're up against with weather and all kinds of. Anyway, long story short, so for a week after we were done shooting, I would have panic dreams every single night that we weren't done shooting yet. Oh my God, I still got to shoot this scene. And I was just like, oh, okay. And you'd sort of come out of your fog and like, okay, we already finished. We're good. I'm good. And I kid you not, every single night for a week straight, just
like you're fucking the actress for Sally from Texas Chainsaw when she did the last scene. She's actually that frantic because she realized like she thought they had wrapped. And they're like, now we're going to cover you in blood again.
No, I had an actress on the latest film have like a panic attack, and we had a very near miss with a rattlesnake, real rattlesnake. We had hurricane force winds from the Santa Ana. We shot out in the desert, so and then like freezing cold nights with the actors covered in blood and buried in the ground. It was just insane. Like in our shooting schedule was all night, so we're shooting from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. But being the producer director, I was first one in, last one out. So every single night getting home and sun is fully up, birds are chirping. Now you have to try and decompress, go to sleep for a couple of hours and do it again the next day. And yeah, it was insane, like full insanity. But I think it added to the vibe of the film because I think everybody in the movie is by day 6 or 7 is completely lost their mind.
Yeah, right. I can appreciate that. I worked third shift for a couple of years, and like you say, it wears on you.
Yeah, it's a different. Your whole body clock is upside down and inside out.
Yeah,
You start to.
And I wasn't even shooting a horror movie, so
you just working 7-Eleven.
No, actually, that was working IT, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I don't know which is scarier.
We got a couple wrap-up questions here at the end. These are covering your entire life and not just horror necessarily. Could be any genre. But I'm going to ask the first 2 questions at the same time because it could be the same answer or different answer for these 2 questions. But if we were to ask you, what is your favorite movie and what movie have you watched more times than any other, what would you say?
Wow. I think the movie I've watched more than any other would be Jaws.
Okay.
I don't even know how many times I've seen it.
I saw that one coming.
Yeah, because if it's on,
I figured it was either that or The Shining.
The Shining 2 is up there. I mean, I can tell you that probably the movies I've watched the most would probably be Jaws, The Shining. Even though I haven't seen it in a while, Taxi Driver. I went through a phase where I would just watch Taxi Driver over and over and over.
It's a good one.
Yeah, so and those probably land in like that and Clockwork Orange probably land in the top.
Well, the real reason for asking these questions are because it'll either underscore something you've already talked about or it'll highlight something we haven't talked about yet and give us a chance to address that. Taxi Driver is left field. What's interesting about that?
Well, I mean, I'm a huge Scorsese fan anyway, but I think that one, hit me at a certain point in my life. I mean, it is not far off from a horror movie. I mean, it is. You could argue Travis Bickle is Jason Voorhees. But it also deals, it's not that, because it also, honestly, it's a very punk rock movie. It's a very like loner outsider in society, someone that doesn't view the world like everybody else seems to be viewing it. And
even as a Mohawk later on. I mean, it's
very, he's got like an army jacket and a Mohawk. He looks like he's in the cloud.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, that was the first thing I thought of too. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it is a very, very punk rock movie, and I think that's what appealed to me about it when it came out. It's just like it's in the ultimate. It's like why you read Charles Bukowski when you're 20. You just feel like you're it's you against the world, and all you got is your beer, and it's just like a similar thing.
I'm starting to see patterns here, but I'll ask anyway just to see what you say. What do you see any common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical, like what's your subgenre?
I do love all. There's great ones in every genre, every subgenre. I mean, I do like. I think ultimately anything that feels real. I can buy any premise. Just throw any weird premise you want at me. Someone's possessed, or there's a zombie apocalypse, or whatever. I'm on board. I'm good. You don't even have to explain it to me. But the rest of it, I really want to feel realistic. And I truly
like it could actually happen.
Yeah, so I think all the movies that I love, whether it's Jaws or Clockwork Orange or Taxi Driver, I think all very different premises and worlds, but in the heart of it, they all feel very realistic.
I like how you tied Jaws into that, because what I was thinking two things. I was thinking monsters and punk. And when you said anything realistic, I said, okay, well, there's a tie in there with punk, because that's usually very realistic. It is based in real life. But I like how you tied Jaws in with that, because like you said, sharks are real. That can really happen.
Yeah, that and also what I maybe even more so is just the relationships with the people and the characters and the dialogue. Jaws always comes up in every interview I do for some reason, but I always say the same thing. Like, I don't even care if the shark isn't on screen. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not waiting for the shark because I'm so
Right.
engaged in these three guys on this boat, and like how they're all three are incredibly different from three different worlds, but are portrayed in such a real way, authentic way.
The situation they're put into.
Yeah. So I mean, I love great dialogue. I love great characters. And to me, that's, without that, you can have all the blood and guts you want, and I'm going to tune out, like I need.
Yeah.
And it's funny because speaking of blood and guts, it comes down to effects as well. Like I would much rather see someone in a rubber suit than a CGI monster. I tune out. I feel like I'm watching a video game. So I don't know. I just think like things based in, have a real sense of reality to them.
Any idea why it is that you like so much these things that are based in reality as compared to the other types of horror that's out there?
I don't know. I wonder if it is a punk thing. I wonder if it is I just always enjoyed the aesthetic of, even when I was younger, not so much now because I'm older, but like I loved being like out in the streets of Boston, co-mingling with punks and homeless people and just like whatever dregs of the earth there were to be had. I just felt like I was alive and I was participating in something. And so like fantastical stuff, even though I love, stuff like that too, Star Wars and whatever, it was not really my jam. And I think that's why I leaned more, even though I do, I'm a fan of some heavy metal bands, I lean more punk as a kid, because for me, heavy metal seemed like dragons and swords and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and it just, I was more into like, just boots on the ground kind of thing. I don't know. It probably all ties together somehow.
Possibly, which might lead into the next question I want to ask. Before I ask the last question, let me tell you the summary that I've been hearing so far, if I were to summarize this call. So the two things that I keep hearing are the horror community, or not even just horror community, but just community in general, because it also ties to the punk situation. Like you like participating in life with other people. And then the other thing that seemed to be coming up multiple times was the idea of adults being helpless, and this discomfort about that. And I think that ties in with possibly power, like the thing that punk and that both have to do with each other. They're almost like flip sides of the same coin. One is about power and the other is about loss of power. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so the last question of why horror, obviously the part about the community, there is definitely a community with the horror realm that you would get that you don't get necessarily in other genres. But what about the part about adults being helpless and power and lack of power? Is there something about the horror genre that speaks to you more relating to that as opposed to other genres? Because I think there are other genres that could potentially touch on that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure there are, but I think that when you were asked the question about what is scary, essentially, not to oversimplify, I think that was initially what popped in my head. But it's interesting that listening to you say these things back, it makes me realize there are these dots are connected. And if I did find that to be even subconsciously like scary, the answer to that is like this punk rock DIY aesthetic, right? Because you will find a way to succeed. You will find a way to accomplish. And so maybe I'm just balancing these two things out in my own brain, to try to like succeed in life. But I don't know why that was the first thing that came to mind. I mean, I wonder if I have some deep-rooted childhood things where I felt like my parents weren't in control or something. I don't know. Who knows, man? It's like,
oh, actually, I'm glad that you said that because it reminded me of something that I wanted to mention but didn't. So there was some stuff that you had talked about relating to growing up in that small town in Massachusetts, and then you didn't say this word, but I kind of got the vibe that you might use the word bland.
uh-huh.
Like, and then sort of like escaping from that to the bigger town and becoming part of something bigger. Like that was part of the community aspect too.
Yeah, for sure. You didn't. It felt very, and I'm sure a lot of people grew up in their hometown.
True.
Feel like
Yes.
this is a dead end. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the life affirming part that you were just talking about, where with the power, I think that also ties in with the coming into the community. I find that also to be life affirming.
Yeah, you could be right. I think there was in a certainly a community like for me in particular, and I think because of all the visual aspects I would get from TV, film, and music videos was very, very urban based. So I always wanted to be like in a city and around a lot of people and a lot of diversity and
the energy.
In danger to a certain. I remember one of the first times I went to visit Rob. He had moved to New York, and this was back in New York in the 80s when it was very much like Taxi Driver.
Oh yeah.
One of the first days I went, we were walking down the street, and a car pulled up, and a guy started waving a gun at us.
Huh.
And,
nice.
I was
from New York, huh?
Yeah, but I was like, oh my God, this is awesome.
Right? Like, oh shit, dude, we're being held at gunpoint in New York City.
Yeah,
wow.
I was like, could this be any better? It was kind of like in Tommy Boy when the deer comes alive and rips the car apart, and Chris Farley's like, that was awesome. Like I was terrified, but then I was like, I can't believe that just happened. It's exactly what it was supposed to happen. Yeah.
Understandably.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think unless, I guess real last question is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't talked about relating to this stuff that you think is relevant?
I don't know, man. I'm pleasantly surprised. I didn't, just like you didn't do a ton of research about me. I didn't do it. I didn't know what I was in for. And so a lot of podcasts, are just kind of like shooting the shit about whatever. And I thought it was just pleasantly surprised that we're diving this deep. So this was kind of fun. Now all day I'm going to be like thinking about myself a little differently.
That's part of the goal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But no, I think we got it. And I urge anyone listening to this to watch Allegoria on August 2nd on Shudder, because now you can psychoanalyze the movie now that you know me a little bit.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, you can kind of use this as a guide as you're watching the film. By the way, I did look that up, and I love the cover art. It's awesome.
Oh, okay. Well, Allegoria is a story. I mean, it's interesting because it is about it's a horror movie, but it functions in the world of art. So it deals with all these different art forms.
Hence
and
the title.
Yeah. So there's a story about an actor, a story about a painter, and
okay.
And I think that what's interesting about that is because when I was writing the movie, I started to realize that a lot of terminology that's used around art is very similar to horror, like the tortured artist, right? The suffering for your art, sell your soul for success. And it's just sort of like this idea of being, haunted by your own ego and insecurities. And so that's what this movie dives into. It's very like so these, of course, because it's a horror movie, we take these manifestations to a whole other level of horrible things that happen to these people. But so yeah, it's an interesting connection to all the things we were talking about. Just this self-realization of certain things if you are trying to live a creative life.
There's some lyrics I wrote many years ago that included the line, "I'm only creative when I cry, when a piece of me dies."
Yeah, yeah. Well, that could be the poster tagline for Allegoria.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I was going to ask you if you wanted to plug anything on the way out, but you kind of touched on that already.
Roll with it. Yeah.
What else did you
Yeah.
say you were working on? You get the podcast?
Yeah, we've got a podcast called Bleeder's Digest, which is great original scary stories. It's DIE, Jest, by the way, if you look it up. Bleeder's Digest, get it?
Even better. Pun and
nice.
it's like a pun within a pun.
Yeah, and then, like I said, Allegoria is my first feature that's coming out August 2nd. It's going to be in a Shudder exclusive. I don't know if you don't know what Shudder is, it's basically like the horror Netflix.
Streaming.
Yeah, so it's a streaming platform. But it'll also be available via VOD and all that kind of stuff, and probably maybe some limited theater stuff to be announced.
Cool.
And then, just wrapped the second feature called Bury the Bride, and that will be out whenever it's done. And yes, on the road this all summer long on the Freaks on Parade tour. So,
yes, that sounded good too.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Well, again, thank you for your time, and thank you to anybody out there listening. Before we end the call, I want to share with you something funny that happened after the call finished. So after we got done, we all hopped offline and went about our business. I started editing the episode. I got about halfway through it and decided I was going to go lay down and take a little bit of a rest because I didn't sleep too well the night before. So I'm laying there in bed thinking about how fun the call was and how well it went and how it had a nice summary at the end. And I started reminding myself of what that summary was. Punk rock equals energy and power. Helpless adults equals loss of energy or power. Wanting to be part of a community, something larger than yourself, again, equals energy and power. And that's when it fucking hit me. ... Powerman 5000. It was right in our fucking face the whole goddamn time. I was so fucking pissed. I had to get up, send a message to Chris and to Spider, and share that with them. We were so pleased at how well the conversation went and how nicely it turned out at the end that we missed the last little linchpin that would have brought it all the way home. Well, that's what happens sometimes. You don't think about it until after you're already done. And as that saying go in French, the spirit of the stairs. You don't think about it until you're just about out the door. Oh well, better late than never, right? Well, again, thank you for your time, and thank you to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We've got a list of people there that we'd like to interview. Let us know if there's anybody you'd like to have added to the list, or if you can help us get in touch with any of those people. Other than that, if you like what we're doing, just tell a friend.